Greetings, programs, and welcome to another episode of the Awesome Friday Movie Podcast. This week, we are talking about the Fantasia Festival out of Montreal. It's currently in its 25th year, just having ended. Both Simon and I attended, and we have a number of films we're going to speak to you about this week. Simon, as always, is with me. Say hi, Simon.
Hi, and yes, this is our Fantasia wrap-up special. You've seen probably about 1,000 times more things than I did, but I did have the chance to watch some stuff. And the quality this year was really, really high with really good diversity. I don't know, you've got a bigger pool than I do. What do you think about the overall quality this year?
Well, first off, my name is Matthew, and welcome. And this is my second year covering the Fantasia Festival, and it's been an honor and a privilege to do so for the second time. I would say, yeah, generally speaking, the festival was really good. It's a really interesting festival. For those of you who aren't in the know, it's a large genre festival out of Montreal, and since we're in unprecedented disease-ridden times, they actually did a hybrid festival this year. So there were some in-person screenings in Montreal, but the bulk of it was online as well, as opposed to last year, which was fully virtual. And I watched 18 or 20 films, including the shorts that I watched, and very generally speaking, the quality was quite high. Yes, it's always difficult with festivals because there's always going to be a few duds when you watch that many films in that shorter time. There's always going to be stuff you don't connect with. But I'm pleased to say that I only really wrote, I think, two not too bad reviews, I would say, out of the 18 or 20 things that I wrote. It's actually probably 15, 16 things that I wrote, I guess. And only two of them are, I would say, quote, bad. And I'm doing air quotes for those of you listening.
Yeah, good. On a podcast, perfect. I mean, I've got a much higher ratio. Everything I watched was really great. That would be three things that I watched, but they were all great. So that's a much higher ratio.
Yeah, I mean, what better way to illustrate the difference between my amount of free time and yours than the number of films we're able to consume?
I'll tell you what, though, I know it's not ideal to run your film festival virtually because you want the people, you want the community, you want the event, right? But I have to say, from someone with two small kids and a very busy life, having a film festival virtually on demand anytime I want is absolutely fantastic. And I loved doing VIF last year as well, virtually. So I expect at some point these festivals are going to go back to on live showings only, and that's going to be sad because I won't be able to go to any of them because a lot of the showings are during the day as well. I mean, we've both seen the lines for the VIF screenings a couple of years ago at Olympic Village, amongst other places. It's always quite hard to get in, and you've got to be there early, and it's all daytime stuff. So that excludes me out on multiple levels.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of the film festivals are really truly going to go back to 100% in person. I think that the die is cast, as it were. Mm-hmm. But certainly that's the intent, right? Even Fantasia is renowned for its opening karaoke party and its big closing gala party, and you don't get those in virtual. It's and that's kind of a shame. Mm-hmm. I've covered VIF for a number of years now, and as much as it's way more convenient for everything to be online, there is something to be said about going to a place and watching a movie and being among people who want to see movies. So that's always my favorite thing about in-person festivals, is that it's very, very rare to be in any theater and have some jackass with his phone out, or people talking. People who are at this festivals very generally want to watch the movies, which is sadly kind of a novelty compared to just regular theater going.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so what should we talk about first?
Yeah, what I think we're going to do, listeners, is we're just going to do a quick survey of some of the stuff we liked at the festival. Simon's going to talk about 3. I'm going to talk about 5 or maybe 6, depending on runtime here. And in sort of shorter form to keep it down to about an hour, hopefully. So, and I'm going to start with a film that played in the middle of the festival online, and it is an indie film called Hellbender. Have you heard anything about this film, Simon, other than
No,
what I wrote?
I have not heard anything about this film, but I instantly think of Hellraiser. So in my mind, it's some kind of Hellraiser spin-off,
Right.
but
So
it's not. It's
Hellbender,
clearly not.
Hellbender is the type of thing that you will, for those of you who go to festivals, it's the type of thing you're definitely going to see at a festival. And that sounds like a dig, but it's not. It's just, it's a very interesting, creative, kind of risk-taking. And it's a coming of age tale crossed with some horror elements. The main young girl is she's been sequestered away. The story starts with her living alone with her mother, and her mother keeps her away from society, ostensibly to protect her. But of course, it turns out that she has more going on. And what happens is she's actually like she's a witch, and her mother is a witch. And when she starts to be about 15, 16, she starts wanting to see people. And a long story short, she meets some people, and they end up feeding her a worm. It's a lot more mundane story than that sounds, but eating the worm, consuming the life force of the worm, awakens the supernatural power within her. Um, and it becomes a super interesting film. It's also notable because the mother and daughter are played by a mother and daughter
Oh, that's cool.
named Toby Poser and Zelda Adams. It's also directed by Toby Poser and Zelda Adams and their father, whose name left my brain now that I started talking. I think it's just John Adams, actually.
Mhm.
Um, and also Zelda's sister Lulu also stars in it. Like it's very much a family affair. John Adams actually won the award for best score for this movie at the festival as well. So
Oh,
it's really like a family production. And on the one hand, it has some elements that it's clearly made on a budget. But there's some really creative effects, and it's a really interesting spin on witchcraft that I don't think I'd really seen before. And there's a couple of really
mhm.
great performances. And Zelda Adams, I believe, yeah, she won Best Actress for this as well, in their main competition, their Cheval Noir competition. Um, and yeah,
So is she?
it's I don't know where this movie's going to end up, but it feels like a perfect fit for like Shudder. And
Yeah.
I hope it gets there so more people can see it.
To be fair, Shudder's a perfect fit for many, many films. It's a fantastic service.
Yeah.
The witchery, the witchcraft in this, is it on the scale of Sabrina the Teenage Witch to the Witch? Like where does the witchcraft fall on the scale? Is it Charmed or is it more something a bit darker than that?
No, it's definitely a bit darker. A lot of the magic involves like foraging. So all the interesting thing about the witchcraft in the film is that it requires them to consume the life force of something in order to do something. So
Mhm,
whether they're eating, berries or whatever that are foraged, or eating small animals or insects, they need to consume
mhm,
something in order to gain its power to then expend that power. And
mhm,
they're constantly um, making spells where they're mixing their blood with herbs and stuff like that. So it's not lighthearted, but it's a really interesting spin. And part of the sort of the coming of age thing is how far the daughter's willing to go with that consumption.
uh-huh,
And why she's being sequestered away, and why the mother in particular has sequestered her away, in terms of like it's about sort of coming into who you are, but also what if who you
mhm.
are is kind of a monster? So, you know. Um,
That
and yeah,
sounds really good.
it's a super interesting film, and I really hope a lot of people get to see it. Again, Shutter's not a sponsor of ours, but
Mm,
I wish they were.
I wish. Yeah,
Um,
it'd be amazing.
but it feels like it'd be a good fit for something like Shutter or like your Arrow Video or Shout Factory or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So you're saying the word interesting a lot. So is this a good, interesting movie or just an interesting movie?
it's a good movie. It's a solid, if you're going to put a number on it, it's a solid 3 out of 5. Like it's not
Hmm.
going to change the world or anything, but
Hmm.
it's well acted, it's well shot. Again, they're
Hmm.
clearly working with some budget constraints, but it's really well put together, and it's a really interesting and unique spin on all the things it's trying to be.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
that's another movie I wish I'd had a chance to see. That sounds really good. I love the
yeah,
idea of a family production as well.
yeah, super interesting. And again, I'm just going to keep saying interesting, but yeah, super. It's really cool to see what a small like any artist collective working together, but it's also just really cool that they all happen to be a family. Yeah.
Excellent.
So why don't we move on? What was your first film you wanted to speak about?
So the first of the three movies I'm going to talk about is a documentary called Alien on Stage. And if, like me, you have a special love for the Alien franchise, especially the first three, maybe even all four movies, or four, I don't know.
There's six if you don't count the Predator ones.
That's the thing. I'm kind of removing Predator, and I'm removing Prometheus, and I'm removing Covenant. So if we go with like the four main ones,
the quadrilogy.
There's
four of them, yeah.
Anyway, I love Alien. It's the whole franchise. I love it for different reasons, and so this documentary kind of picks up on this community theatre group. So there's a bus company in Dorset, which is the southwest of England, where there's a bunch of working class people who work on buses, who every year put on a stage show. And every year they put on, up until a few years ago, they put on a self-written pantomime, so your Robin Hoods or something like that. Pantomime is this very British interactive Christmas show where you basically put on a common story or fairy tale. The men dress like women, and there's lots of audience participation, shouting things like, "Oh no, they didn't," and "Watch out, they're behind you," and things like this. And there's singing, and it's very, very light and very jolly, and a little bit bawdy, but that's British for you. And then this one year, the kid who writes all their stuff is a massive horror movie fan and a massive Alien fan, and gave them a choice of things. He said, I want to write a movie. I want us to do a movie. And he gave them the choice of, oh God, what is it? Alien, maybe RoboCop, and something else. And that's the first point of surreal, ridiculous nature of this whole thing, that these older bus employees decided to go with Alien without even seeing it. So this documentary is basically a bunch of people who are not even Amdram actors, directed by a guy who's ex-military, doesn't really know anything about drama, who put on an Alien show. And because someone heard about it on social media and came to watch them in London, she was a filmmaker and decided to do a Kickstarter, which raised thousands of pounds, and then told them they were coming to do one performance in Leicester Square, London, where all the big theatres are. So basically the documentary kind of picks up on the end of their process. They did 2 nights in their local theatre with 20 people watching. And then the whole world explodes around them as suddenly they've got 3 weeks to get ready to go to London. And this is one of those perfectly British stories. The British love underdog, working class underdog movies. If you've seen things like The Full Monty, this is kind of like The Full Monty, but it's not fiction. It's real people. It's very, very real English bus drivers putting on Alien, and they have a guy who makes all the sets, and it's really a testament to creative ingenuity that he makes full Nostromo sets and Alien sets, and he follows guides on the internet on how to build this alien suit, and it's all bits of foam and ends of vacuum tubes and all kinds of things spray painted black. And by the end of this, when you follow them there, and they are so out of their depth, it's ridiculous. And the rehearsals don't go well because they don't really learn their lines. They spend most rehearsals sat around drinking tea and eating cookies, eating biscuits, because that is the British way. That is the way we do things. But they all put their heart into it. And just hearing the lines from Aliens, but said in a Dorset bus driver accent, it's very similar to the effect of watching the British Office go through anything serious. Right, there's a wonderful moment where the face hugger is on Kane, and the captain Dallas is cut it off. I don't care. I'll take responsibility. But in the stage show, he's yeah, cut it off. Your take responsibility. Yeah, just do it. And it's just very, very, very matter of fact, and it makes it hilarious. And I mean, it's you should watch it. You can probably guess where this goes. They go to Leicester Square, and against all odds, they put on this stage show with the audience are laughing, but with them from beginning to end, and they act their hearts out, and they get a standing ovation. They get invited back for the next 2 years, and the Leicester Square Theatre says it's their favorite show they've ever put on. And it's if you can watch the end of this movie without tears in your eyes, then you are a heartless human, because it's really difficult for me. I'm trying to write a review of it, and it's difficult because I've been a theatre director with no money, and I've tried to use drama with people who've never done it before, and I just recognize so many of these struggles, and just the way that they go, absolutely, they really go for it in terms of the props and the sound effects and the staging, and you'll believe that by the end of it that these bus drivers can put on Alien, and it's extremely heartwarming. It takes maybe a little while to get into, maybe because I think the filmmakers they use a lot of the kind of the UI from Alien to try and paint the picture, and so it's a little bit slow to get into. But once like they really get into this movement to London, and you get to know all the characters, it's beautiful. By the end of it, it's just beautiful. It's so touching, and they do a really good job of showing us who these people are. Like that, they are not. They're not funneled down any kind of editorial route to make them seem a certain way. They're just who they are, and they're very, very genuine. Not a single shred of acting experience between them, and yet they pull off Alien. It's really wonderful.
This sounds, in a word, adorable.
It's adorable. It's got you written all over it. It really, really does. But
yeah, this movie was actually on my list to watch, and I honestly don't know why I didn't. I think part of it is I think it's technically. I was trying to focus a little bit on Canadian film, and I was trying to focus a little bit on this year's film, and it was a holdover from late last year. But I've regretted watching it ever since. Actually, since the beginning of the festival, when another friend of mine watched it and was like, "You need to watch this film," and then I just didn't because I'm a silly person.
The highlight of this movie is they decide on the night, without testing it, to do a chest for the chest bursting scene. They decide they find this prosthetic chest and cut a hole in it for their little baby alien to wriggle through. So because they show, like, for the last 40 minutes is just the main parts of the stage show, and the climax of this thing is, and the music and the editing is fantastic. You see from the audience perspective, he's like thrashing on the table, and they quietly hook up these hooks, because just behind you've got two grown bus drivers, each with fishing rods, trying to hoik this thing out, and one's trying to pull it up and the other one's trying to pull it out, and honestly, you know they succeed, and when they do, it's kind of a stand up and cheer moment. It's really, really wonderful.
Well, it sounds excellent. I really hope this is another film that, like, you can sort of tell it's going to end up on a streaming service somewhere. And as soon as it does, I'm going to sit down with my wife and make her watch it, basically.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. So yes, Alien on Stage. Lovely. Good job. Good. Bus drivers endorse it.
Good. Well, let's move on. My next film I'd like to talk about is one that was acquired by Shudder, and again, not a sponsor. But if you're listening, acquired by Shudder ahead of the festival, and it's a British slow burn horror film called Martyr's Lane. And it's sort of
where all the martyrs live,
something like that.
Martyrs.
The setup of this film is basically there's a young girl who lives with her mother and father on a vicarage, which is, it's a large sort of church estate, and it's a small town, and she's kind of an outcast within the town. She's kind of an outcast within her own family as well, and the whole film, this is an important point, the whole film is from her point of view, and she's about 6. So she's, there's points in the film where she's walking in on people talking, and she doesn't understand, and we don't understand because she doesn't understand. We know her parents are going through something. We know that her parents have been through something significant, but we don't know what it is because she doesn't know what it is. And one night, she's in her bedroom, and another young girl comes in through the window. A sort of spectral child, if you will. And without giving too much away, each night that this other girl comes, the she gives our main girl a task, and every time she completes a task, which is often just like go out and find this thing in the bush, or like go and climb this tree, or whatever it is, whatever she finds or discovers by doing that task reveals a little bit more about this event that her parents are clearly recovering from. And I really don't want to say too much more because this is a really melancholy film. It's a horror film, like there's ghosts. But it's a really melancholy film. It's really about building suspense and dread and that sort of feeling of something missing inside that comes with I can't even say what it is without giving something pretty major away. And I really don't want to. This film will be on Shudder in less than a month, and I really would think lots of people should try and watch it. It's really wonderfully acted. The main little girl, let's just look her up here. I should really have this ahead of time. I'm very professional.
Is it played as a horror, or is it horrifying in tone?
No,
is it a horror?
It's horror. It's a horror film. Like it's a fantasy type horror movie. And it's a lot of the horror comes from the fact that just the young girl, whose name is Leah, and she's played by a young girl named Kira Thompson, just doesn't actually really fully understand what's going on most of the time because she's like 6, and how could she? And there's big things happening around her, right? And her and the other little girl, the girl who comes in through the window, whose name, the actor's name is Sienna Sayer, also again like 6 or 7, and everything about their two performances is so wonderfully sincere, and you just really believe it's two young girls talking, even though you know there's something sort of spectral and not quite right about the other little girl, right? Like, you know, something's not quite like she came in through the window, the second story window. Like, you know, she's not alive, basically. But it's all about the film ends up being about what it's like to be haunted in multiple ways, what it's like to be haunted. And I really don't want to say much more than that. It's again, it's a really well done film, and it's more than anything, it definitely has its moments of scariness, but it's at its core, it's actually really melancholy, which for some reason I've really gravitated to in the last couple of years. Yeah,
that sounds good. I'll definitely watch that when it's on Shudder.
Yeah.
So
again, not a sponsor. So moving on, I think we're about to talk about the only film on our list that we have both seen, and I'm gonna let Simon take it away.
What a film this is. So this is a Japanese movie called Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, and it's a sci-fi, I guess, in its premise. A man owns a cafe, and he lives above the cafe, and in the cafe is a monitor screen, and it's linked to his screen in his apartment upstairs. And he discovers very early on that what he can see on the screen upstairs is 2 minutes into the future. That's the premise, and it rolls with it, just like you're going to have to roll with it. It rolls with it. And so he starts experimenting about when he can speak to himself, or how the dynamics of seeing, because when you're downstairs, you're then seeing 2 minutes into the past. And then monitors get moved and face each other, and the time goes on in 2 minute increments into the past and into the future. And the reason I'm not making much sense is that the premise of the movie, it starts pretty quickly with here's the thing, and then it doubles down every like 20 minutes. It adds another layer of complication. And from a filmmaking point of view, they've shot this thing to make it look like one single shot, and you don't have to look
which
like
is
this.
which is insane. Like,
Well, the two insane things about this movie are, yes, that they have organized it to make it look like one shot, which the planning for that is through the roof, and honestly, the way they stitch it together is really, really effective. But in addition to that, when these kind of 2 minutes start looping back on each other, you start to get 4 minutes and 6 minutes and 8 minutes. There's one point where this story is like 4 layers deep, and I can't even imagine the planning and the writing that had to go into making that work, because it really, really works. They really pull it off, and it's just a very there's no music. It's quite stark. It's just a very earnest, funny sci-fi Japanese, high concept Japanese movie, and it's just a joy from beginning to end. I mean, what's your take on it?
I mean, that exactly. I think, like, to give you an idea of, listeners, what how it works out is the very first scene where he figures out that the monitor is looking 2 minutes into the future is he goes upstairs to go to bed, and someone on his computer screen is talking to him, and it's him. And he's like, "What is going on?" And the him on the computer screen is like, "I'm 2 minutes in the future." And he's like, and he says, "Well, what do you mean?" And then him 2 minutes in the future says, "Well, come downstairs, you'll understand." And then he goes downstairs, and they have the same conversation again, but you see it from the other side. So when Simon says that they double down on this, they really do double, triple, and quadruple down on it, because you end up with multiple characters speaking to, a lot of the time, themselves 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 minutes into the future and the past. And like, as the film goes on, lots of little moments start to build on one another. Once they inevitably start trying to experiment to manipulate time to their own gain, things go off the rails, but in a way where the payoff to everything they do is so perfect. Sorry,
I'm just thinking about.
We both really like this movie, is the thing. Like, the timing of this is incredible. I'm sure they had to use like recordings to pull it off, but it doesn't feel like that, like, at all.
But even the recordings then, which they have to act against, everything, there's a lovely little thing in the end credits where there's a little behind the scenes where they show people running with stopwatches and around the directors, like, running with cameras and timing everything, just to get each scene must last exactly the right number of seconds to interact with the other scene they've already recorded and showing on the other screen. It's just mind-blowing how they pulled it off. I'm with 6 or 7 characters at one point interacting with this. It's quite a feat to follow all that and keep it going.
Yeah, for sure. This movie actually won the Audience Award for Best Asian Film. It also won a special mention in the Cheval Noir and I think another category as well. It's just like, here's the thing, it's only like 82 minutes or something like that, and it's a pure joy from beginning to end. You can really tell that everyone involved really wants to pull it off, and everyone's clearly having a ball doing it, which really goes a long way. And
it's if you're a time travel movie nerd like we are, obviously, it addresses those time travel questions. Like, if you're seeing something happening in the future, can you change it? And there's a couple of points where they're about to do something different, but because they've seen themselves do something in the future, they feel restricted to doing that future thing. Yeah. So did that future thing always happen, or would they ever have changed? What would have happened if they changed it? And there's other little things about they pass information back to their past selves, but the past selves only learn that information at that point. So when they go to the future, they pass that information to their past selves because they learned it from their future selves. And so there's lots of mind-bending, time travel, timey-wimey stuff going on. But
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
just treated with
imagine.
such like levity, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, imagine whatever your favorite time loop movie is, but imagine they had 1/100th the budget. This is what we're
Yeah,
talking
really.
about.
Yes.
You know, like, it's
Yeah.
so simple, and it feels really, and I used this word before in talking about it before, but it feels really scrappy. Like it feels
Hmm.
really like a labor of love in the best way possible.
Yeah.
And this is another one where I don't know if it's going to get North American distribution, but I really hope it does. I really hope a lot of
Yeah.
people get to see this movie because it's so much fun.
It's interesting that it does feel a bit scrappy because the way this movie's been organized is like military precision. They would have had to work hard to keep that kind of scrappy, lively feeling between the cast members and the script and everything going on. Because it could have felt really prescribed and straightforward. But they did a great job to make it feel like they were actually making this up as they went, whereas the amount of pure preparation and planning for this meant obviously every second was completely mapped out. It's
Yeah,
really good.
100%. Uh, might be. It's definitely in my top three. I know you only have three things, but it's
Yeah,
definitely in
it's
my
in my
top
top three.
three.
It's in my top three as well.
Yeah. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So Beyond
I
the
hope you
Infinite Two
get
Minutes. Seek it out and find it if you
yeah,
can.
I hope you get a chance to watch it. It's really lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you talking about now, Matt?
I'm going to move on to a Canadian feature. It's the debut writing and directorial and writing feature debut of a Canadian actor named Mark O'Brien. Um, the film is called The Righteous. Mark O'Brien, you may recognize, he was in Ready or Not a year or two ago. He also had a recurring role on the AMC series Halt and Catch Fire. He also was in Denis Villeneuve's Arrival in a supporting role. He's a real sort of up and comer Canadian actor. He's been in a number of Canadian productions as well. Probably most notably, um, there's a detective show I can't remember the name of, but he was on it. I feel like I know things when we sit down, and then as soon as we sit down, I'm like,
Stuff. He did stuff.
He did stuff. Anyway, so he's written and directed this film. It's called The Righteous. It also stars Henry Czerny and Mimi Kuspik. She's got a Polish name that I can't pronounce. Kuspik, I think, is how you pronounce it. And it is a story of faith and guilt, and it's shot in a really sumptuous, high contrast, black and white. Like imagine if the Sin City films were good.
Oh, wow.
That's not fair. I mean, they're not bad, but imagine that it was used to greater effect, let's say.
Yes.
Kuzik, Mimi Kuzik, that's her name. And the setup of the film is that so Henry Czerny is a former priest and Mimi Kuzik is his wife, and they had an adopted daughter who has recently passed away, and they are fresh in the grieving process. And then one night, a handsome young stranger who is injured shows up, and they take him in because he's injured, and their whole lives are turned upside down. And you've probably seen some elements of this before. You know, stranger disrupts people's lives, not a new setup. But this film is very well written and beautifully acted, in particular by Henry Czerny and Mark O'Brien. And if you follow the site at all or follow me at all, you know that I have a predisposition towards liking films that feel like stage plays. And this is one of those. Very much so. Most of the best scenes of this movie are Henry Czerny and Mark O'Brien just talking at a table. And they talk about faith and guilt mainly, and the and grief, and it's got a real foreboding tone, and it's got some real melancholy moments, and it's got some real like capital A acting moments from Czerny and O'Brien, but not in the bad way, like in the like, oh yeah, Henry Czerny, national treasure, Henry Czerny, you know, like guy who shows up in a movie like Mission Impossible 1 and walks away with the movie, you know? Um, it's I don't know much more I can say. I can't be effusive about this movie enough. I don't necessarily think it's 100% successful. I think that it's very, very, very good. Probably a solid, 4 out of 5 if you're going to put a rating on it. Um, but given that it's Mark O'Brien's debut as a feature writer and director, like what a film, like what a debut. Uh, it's it's really well done, like really, really well done. It's beautifully acted, beautifully written, and beautifully shot as well.
Reminds me of your friend Mr. Rockefeller's debut was very much like a stage play as well.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting you say that too. So, one of the things I really appreciated about this film is that Henry Czerny and Mimi Kuzik's life and their home feel incredibly lived in that same way that your grandparents' home feels really lived in. Like every interior set in this film feels like your grandmother's house with knickknacks on the wall and, faded photos and paintings and just stuff kind of everywhere. The home feels, I keep saying this, but lived in, but it feels lived in a really authentic way. And again, the high contrast black and white makes all these little details pop in really interesting ways.
Yeah.
And it also just makes for some really dramatic frames of the film. Because it's, again, like when something is in shadow, it's really in shadow, right? One of the early scenes when Mark O'Brien's character first shows up is shot outside, and he's lying on the ground, and Henry Czerny is on like the porch, and he's lit. He's in full silhouette, and it's one of the most striking images that I've seen in the whole festival.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know when this film is coming out, but I assume that it's going to because it's quite good. Mark O'Brien did win Best Screenplay in the main competition of the festival, and I know for a fact that it's going to be playing at the Fin Atlantic Festival later in September, and I presume it'll be at VIFF as well. I don't know when it's going to go into wide release, but there's going to be plenty of opportunity for you to see it, at least in Canada, because all these festivals will have an online component this year. So, and I'd expect it to hit again. Fin for sure, Atlantic Festival for sure. A VIFF, I would imagine, and probably Whistler, I would imagine too. But that's just a guess on my part. Either way, when it's around, you should definitely seek it out because it's a hell of a debut feature.
Okay, sounds amazing.
Yeah, and just very pretty, just very pretty.
Yeah, cool. Well, the third and last film I'm going to talk about is probably my pick of the festival of the three. It's a movie set in Tokyo called Dreams on Fire. The director is a man called Philip Mckee, who's an American film school graduate who has lived in Japan for a couple of years and made lots of short films using Japanese culture as his backdrop. But this is, I believe it's his first feature. I could be wrong, but it's certainly his highest profile movie. And Dreams on Fire is about a dancer called Yume, who at the beginning, there's a dance show that we think is her as a young girl watching that she has aspirations to be a dancer. And the first scene is her telling her extremely overbearing traditional father that she wants to become a dancer, and he basically gives her an ultimatum, and she leaves home, and she is from this very, very rural area of Japan, and her father is dismissive to the point of being cruel, like really controlling. You get the feeling it's a very traditional kind of, in his mind, it should be a traditional family. The mother is too scared to say anything. He's trying to make his daughter do what he wants to do, and she stands up for what she wants to do, and she leaves. She goes to Tokyo to become a dancer. Now, you've seen this movie before. A young girl has aspirations to become a dancer and becomes a dancer, and it's very showy. And at one point, Missy Elliott turns up. If you've seen Jessica Alba's Honey, then this is nothing like that. there is a scene actually where Yume picked up some choreography where she kind of does some moves while watching a screen. And just for a second, I'm like, oh my God, it's the Honey basketball choreography scene all over again. But luckily it's not. And
Wait, are you denying the greatness of that scene?
So Honey is absolutely one of my favorite movies to watch, and it is absolutely one of the worst movies ever made. So you can find that balance. It is so bad. We could do a whole podcast on how bad Honey is and how much I love to watch it. But I guess watching so many Western movies of underdogs following their dreams of being successful is such a common movie trope by this point that Dreams on Fire actually pushes against all of that and is an extremely authentic and brutal exploration of what it takes to be creative in a society that doesn't really value that anymore. And obviously I'm quite bitter about that whole thing anyway, but this young actress who her name is Bambi Naka. Now, I didn't recognize her. I watched this movie and then I Googled her afterwards, and she's a big deal. Like, she's a big personality, a dancer in Japan. Super, super cool and trendy and funky. But I'm really glad I didn't know that going into this movie, because she plays this character Yume with the most innocent, almost naivety, this beautiful kind of rural approach to life. She is completely unprepared for the rigors and the people and the darkness waiting for her in Tokyo. And what's really, really nice about this is that it feels so authentic in that Tokyo is usually presented to Western audiences as this utopia of politeness and cleanliness and all these, all the very, very positive traits. You can tell that everyone who made this is showing us the real Tokyo, and she goes through some horrible shit where she is just so trusting and open, and she just wants to do her best. She just wants to be a dancer. So she ends up in a terrible situation as like a hostess bar. This Japanese hostess is like this idea of a bar worker who also offers conversation, but she gets into a really bad situation there. She goes to auditions, and it's funny in that there's a number of opportunities in this movie where she could have her big break and the music would swell and she wins, and she doesn't get it. She keeps getting closer and closer, and she misses out on some things because she doesn't have a social media following. She misses out on other things because she's too tired to go. But she keeps like pushing and trying, and not in a real like American princess kind of way, but in a really determined, sort of tenacious kind of way, whilst being the most lovely, innocent person you've ever met as well. And she sleeps in this Tokyo apartment that's maybe 2 foot by 5 foot on a padded tatami floor with lights and music pounding all night. So she doesn't get any sleep, and she goes from like dance class and all these different things she goes to. She becomes like a go-go dancer and then a fetish dancer and all these things that she becomes. The common thread is most of the women are really supportive. Like, you might expect a kind of a Pink Ladies kind of thing where she walks in there and all the old seasoned vets are like growling at her, like Moulin Rouge, the seasoned dancers growling at the rookie. And what's really, really, really nice is that it's always the women who are supporting her and it's the men who are assholes. Can't think why they would go that angle. The men in this most of the men in this are terrible, awful human beings. And you just get the feeling that this is not over amplified for the sake of the movie. Like, this is a very authentic underbelly of Tokyo. But because it's a dance movie, the absolute best thing about this movie is the way it shows you dance. It's not like a pop video at all. There's multiple dance styles and music styles in this film. It starts with street dance and break dance. There's classical Japanese. There's modern jazz style. There's fetish style and some S&M stuff, and a couple of competitions towards the end. And I absolutely adore how this director shot all the dancing, because the whole film really takes its time. It's a 2 hours 20 long, and it's a long movie. It doesn't rush through anything, including the dancing. Like, it shows us a lot of the time without any dialogue the beauty of this dance. And Bambi Naka is this incredible dancer, like incredible, but you really get the sense of the character finding her feet. And with each dance style, the camera kind of behaves slightly differently. So at the first dance competition you see is like the street dance face-off, or the first proper one. And the camera just sits there, quite a low angle, just looking up at these dancers. No like fancy zooming or cutting, it really just long takes of these people just dancing, and it is glorious. And then later there's very close angles that are very dreamlike. There's lots of dream iconography and some nightmare visions later on as well. And I loved how the director shot the different dances really to bring out the dance style. And then, of course, towards the end, as her journey concludes and she finally, gets a bit of light at the end of that tunnel, that it ends, and a little, not abruptly, but quickly. And it's just a really powerful movie about someone who is creative and just doesn't want to give up. And that really resonated with me. And everyone's fantastic in it. Like the main actress is an incredible dancer, and you don't get any sense that she's famous at all. She really portrays this innocence. And it really reminded me of, oh my God, what was the film in the Vancouver Asian Film Festival that I recommended to you?
The one I never watched.
Oh my God, what was that called? Oh, I can't believe I forgot what it's called. And it's about a girl getting ready to leave home, and it's her like trying to go through the relationship with her best friend. And these two best friends are major pop stars. They're part of the AKB like pop troupe in Thailand, I believe. And again, she was just amazing at playing this very quiet, very like unassuming character. And this movie really reminded me of that as well. It's a really uplifting, beautiful, stunningly beautiful movie about the beauty of dance and how tough it is to make any headway in that world. It's really good.
Was it Curtain Up? Was that the film you're thinking of?
No, not Curtain Up. No, it's Before I Go. Maybe it's called Before I Go. Oh, that's really going to annoy me. I really recommend that movie. You're right. I'll try and find it, but it's on my Vimeo account, so I'll have a quick look. But if you like creative journey movies, or if you like sort of artistic exploration in your films, it's a really beautiful film. I really hope it gets a release somewhere.
Is this the kind of film that might inspire you to reclaim some of your acting, will and time to act?
So I miss acting way more than I thought I would. The problem is not the will is not the problem. It's the energy, but it's also the energy. Time. Like, I perhaps should stop watching movies where creative people do anything to follow their dreams, because it hurts. It really, really hurts that I'm not part of that community anymore. So maybe, I hope so. I would like to think so, but like all creative things, it's an exploit for young people with energy who have a bit of money, and I'm none of those things. So
you say that, but famous character actor John Mahoney took his first acting lesson at the age of 37.
Well, maybe I could do with some new acting classes too, so who knows.
Yeah, I mean, he had the advantage of being in Chicago and being recommended to join Steppenwolf Theater and a whole bunch of other stuff. But
Yeah, don't get me started on the art scene in Vancouver and the opportunities in Vancouver, because oh boy, it's not Chicago, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So yeah, the movie I was thinking of is called Where We Belong.
Oh, okay.
And the main actress, I can't remember. I'll have to find out, but look it up. It's called Where We Belong, from 2019. I really recommend you watch that as well, because the performance in that movie is mind-blowing. It's really, really good. So I love Asian movies. I just love, there's so many great films coming out of so many Asian countries at the moment that I really look forward to things like Dreams on Fire, or any kind of film festival now. That's pretty the first thing I look for is Asian horror. Or how did I describe it to you? Like super earnest Japanese ensemble movies, like special actors, or One Cut of the Dead. Like, this is my special genre. So this is another movie that's just blown me away. It's doing really different things than the kind of things we usually watch. So highly recommended.
Nice. Well, I missed that film as well, but I really wanted to see it. I really hope it gets a release somewhere. I believe it's Canadian co-production. I think Mr. Mckee is actually Canadian. I think. Either way, the list of countries on it are Canada.
Yeah.
But I really hope it gets released or plays at other festivals so I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're gonna wind down with one last film.
Yes. What's your last film?
We're hitting about an hour right now, so we should probably wrap it up really quick. But my last film is a film you can actually watch in theaters right now, if it's safe. As always, unprecedented times. If it's not safe to go to the theaters, you don't have to see a movie in the theaters if you don't risk your life or anyone else's. But Donnie Yen is in a new movie this year called Raging Fire, and it played as part of the Fantasia Festival, and it's in theaters in America and Canada right now. And if you like 90s style, over the top, bombastic, melodramatic action films with paper thin plots that feel incredibly deep for some reason, then Raging Fire is going to be your jam. This movie whips a ton of butt. And there's no other way to say it. The setup is that Donnie Yen is the older, completely by the book, morally righteous Hong Kong police detective. And at the beginning of the film, he's out to get a crime boss. But the initial operation to arrest that crime boss is interrupted by a team of highly trained individuals who kill the crime boss and a number of other policemen, really. And it turns out that this gang is a group of police officers headed up by a character that used to be Donnie Yen's protege in the police. And that character is played by a Canadian Chinese actor called Nicholas Tsay. He's from Vancouver. And although he's a big star in Japan, he's an interesting guy, actually, because he's an actor, he's a singer, he's a celebrity chef and travel show host. He's done a little bit of everything, and who can blame him? He also learned martial arts, apparently. I learned from Sammo Hung, which is incredible.
Cool.
But basically, the rest of the film is, master versus former apprentice. And the reason that the protege hates and is out to get his former master is that the reason the protege and his whole team of colleagues went to jail, and they went to jail because Donnie Yen's character wouldn't lie. Right? So in the beginning, it's revealed eventually that there was an operation to get a different crime boss. And there were two things that needed to happen, and Donnie Yen and one team went one way, and the protege, Nicholas Tsay, went the other way with his team, and they did something that Donnie Yen's moral compass won't let him forgive. And when they were tried for that crime, he could have very easily said that, something to get them off, but he didn't. He presented it in black and white, and they all went to jail, and now they're out to get him. So
it sounds amazing. When do I watch? How do I watch this?
again, it's in theaters right now. I imagine it'll
Right.
get an on-demand release sooner than later. I don't want to tell you much more about it. You can probably guess most of what's going to happen in this film, except the thing you have to remember is it's Donnie Yen fighting everyone. There's a there's a fight that takes him literally from the rooftops to the sewers, both literally and metaphorically. It's interesting
Metaphorical
because
sewer.
well, it's interesting because when you watch a really good martial arts film, and we don't really get those here, right? Like they come from Hong Kong and from China, right? Hong Kong in particular is really good at this, at using fights to advance character and plot.
Yeah.
And a lot of the fights in this movie do that really well, in particular character. There's a lot of sort of the undertone and underpinnings of the story are, would things be different if they had chosen different, like if the inciting incident to their hatred for one another is again that, you know, Nicholas say did this thing that Donnie Yen can't forgive him for, but what if their positions had been reversed? Right? Would things be different? It's sort of an open-ended question in the film. But it also, so there's a lot of, you know, nice, just deep enough to be super compelling elements to this film.
Right.
But there's also a scene where Donnie Yen jumps off a second floor balcony onto the top of a minivan, commandeers it from the guy driving the minivan, but before he drives away, make sure to ask if he has comprehensive insurance. And like the big final fight takes place in a church, and Donnie Yen and Nicholas say are bathed in the light that's shining through the stained glass, so it's all colorful and like very and really overwrought music, and it's just amazing.
Wow.
So again, like if you like, again, big, remember there was that time period in the 90s when John Woo in particular broke really big in North America, and we ended up with these big Hong Kong style action scenes in American. So if you like that kind of movie, you need to seek out this movie. Because
I'm on board. That sounds amazing.
Because yeah, again, it's big 90s style, over the top, melodramatic, character driven, but action. It's really good. It might be my it's I don't so beyond it's funny, I said on a different podcast that Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes was my favorite film of the podcast, but the further away from it I get, the more I think Raging Fire might actually be my pick of the festival.
That's a fair choice by the sound of it.
Yeah, so Raging Fire, Donnie Yen. And honestly, here's the thing, Donnie Yen is 58 and is still probably the greatest martial artist on the planet.
He's so great, just so watchable. I don't know what that thing, right? With good martial artists, he is that thing. He's got so much watchability.
Well, here's the thing about Hong Kong martial arts films that you don't get in North America. I mean, there's a number of things. I could talk about this for a long time, but and we've talked about this particular thing before, but when in Hong Kong martial arts films, when they fight, it appears as though they have intent. Like they're not punching to each other's arms, they're punching to their heads and bodies. When they're throwing a sword or whatever it is, they are striking to each other and not to each other's weapon. And that alone, you know, makes the whole thing have a much more visceral feel to it. And they also just know to pull the camera back and let us watch the fight, which I feel like we really miss out in North American cinema. That's, you know, you get directors who want to change camera angles and you know, cut to make things seem fast, but you don't need to do that, man. Just like point a camera at Donnie Yen and watch him whip somebody's ass. That's what you want. That's what I want to see, and that's what this movie delivers. So
I'm so on board with that.
Yeah,
fantastic.
So we are, I think, over an hour at this point. So I think we should.
I've got no more films to talk about, so
I could go on for ages, but we probably shouldn't.
So your choice of the film of Fantasia is Raging Fire?
I'm going to say Raging Fire this time. Yeah.
Oh, great. And mine is Dreams on Fire. So the fire movies win. Excellent.
Yeah. So we'd like to take this opportunity, obviously, to thank you for listening to our rambling. We very much appreciate you.
We really do.
And at this moment, again, ask you for, that thing, which is to say, please, if you like what you hear, give us a review or a like or a subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice. If you like what you hear and feel like you'd like to support us, patreon.com/MC Simpson is a thing. You can find links to that and all of our social profiles at my landing page on the website, or just go to awesomefriday.ca. They're all there in the sidebar and under every article. What do you have coming up, Simon? Anything?
Well, we have there's a little independent movie we're watching next Wednesday called Shang-Chi.
Yeah.
Just from a small movie company called Marvel. So we're watching Shang-Chi on Wednesday.
Yeah. So we should have a lot to talk about next week. With any luck, I will also have seen Candyman, which I have not been able to see so far.
Yeah. That looks good. That looks really good.
So next week will be a good episode. So
cool.
Until that time, we're going to sign off. Thank you again for listening. We love each and every one of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.